All right, folks, welcome to According to Sam. This is episode 244. Thank you for tuning in. I'd said that I wanted to start getting into the financial crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, and kind of break down how each of these presidents, these three presidents from the Bush-Clinton dynasty, played a role in that crash. Been wanting to talk about that for the past few weeks, but we're not going to talk about that in this podcast either. I pushed it off in other podcasts, and we're not going to get to it in this podcast either, but we will get to it on Monday. Today, we're going to talk about, I have a couple of things that I want to talk about. We're still talking about the Bush-Clinton dynasty, and who these people represent, but they have brought the Russian hoax back on us. And if you remember, this started in 2016, the Russia hoax, and bringing this out in elections. They told us that the Russians meddled in the 2016 election, and then in 2020, they told us that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. Hunter Biden just pled guilty to the tax charges in California. So that trial was supposed to be starting here pretty soon, but there won't be a trial there. But Hunter Biden was convicted of charges in Connecticut where his laptop was used as evidence. And these liars from the security spy state, friends of the Bush-Clinton dynasty, they told us all in 2020 that it was Russian disinformation before that election. And then now, conspicuously, after Labor Day, like I was telling you in the last podcast, the campaign really kicks off after Labor Day. It's the sprint to November. And 2 days after we get back from the Labor Day vacation, we learned that the Justice Department, Biden's Justice Department, is indicting Russians and accusing the Russians of meddling in this election again. Do you know how stupid you would have to be to fall for this again? You would have to be, I mean, if you would fall for this, you're not a thinking person at all. This has been going on since 2016. You had the phony Steele dossier that led to the Crossfire Hurricane FBI investigation, spying on Trump, which led to the Mueller investigation, special counsel investigation that gave us nothing. They lied about the laptop. The laptop is real now and being used as evidence. Why would you believe these liars? Again, it is beyond me. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about another member of the Bush-Clinton dynasties, George Bush's vice president here, his daughter. And this is why I tell you that we know who the Bushes are for, even though this guy hasn't come out and endorsed 200 members of his father's administration, of his administration, of the McCain and Romney campaigns, and now Liz Cheney have all come out and endorsed Kamala Harris, along with Barack Obama and his wife and all of his people, and Bill Clinton and his wife and all of his people. This is what I tell you, that the empire is behind Kamala Harris. She represents the empire. She does not represent change. And Liz Cheney coming out and endorsing Kamala Harris shouldn't surprise anyone. Take a listen.
Breaking news right now, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who played such a key role leaving Republican leadership over the Jan 6 insurrection, then helped chair the committee looking into it. She announced tonight she is voting for Kamala Harris.
Oh, big surprise.
The Cheney name means a lot in Republican politics.
The Cheney name means a lot in Republican politics. That's a lie. She was censored by the Republican Party, by her Republican colleagues in the House of Representatives for her role in January 6th. She wasn't put on the January 6th committee to co-chair the January 6th committee by the minority leader, who was Kevin McCarthy at the time. She was placed there by Nancy Pelosi. She was placed there by Nancy Pelosi to chair, the leader of the other party. What are you talking about? That she's a big name in Republican politics. And then she went back to her district to run for re-election, and she got routed by Republican voters. She doesn't represent Republicans. She represents the dynasty, the Bush-Clinton dynasty. What are you talking about? So it's not surprising at all that Liz Cheney is now endorsing Kamala Harris. But what is surprising is the stuff that Liz Cheney said about Kamala Harris when she was pretending to be conservative and to have conservative values. This is a tweet that she put out in 2020 about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is a radical liberal who would raise taxes, take away guns and health insurance, and explode the size and power of the federal government. She wants to recreate America in the image of what's happened on the streets of Portland and Seattle, is what Liz Cheney says about Kamala Harris, who she's now endorsing. We won't give her the chance, is what she says. Now she's endorsing Kamala Harris. But why? What's Liz Cheney's beef with Donald Trump that she would betray all of her values and everything that she says that she once believed to support Kamala Harris over Donald Trump? I mean, like I was telling you in the last podcast, or in the podcast before that, this goes back to the South Carolina debate when Donald Trump was running against Jeb Bush, his brother, and he calls out George Bush for lying us into the war. Well, if George Bush lied us into the Iraq war, so did Liz Cheney's father. Liz Cheney's father played a huge role in lying us into the Iraq war. I mean, probably a bigger role than George Bush himself played in lying us into the Iraq war. It's interesting because the code name for the Secret Service, you know how all of the presidents have different code names. I think Barack Obama was Renegade, and forget what Bush was and what Clinton, but Dick Cheney's code name from the Secret Service was Edgar. They would call him Edgar. And what Edgar related to was a old 1940s and 50s ventriloquist who had a dummy that the dummy would talk and Edgar would be the ventriloquist. Edgar had his hand up the dummy's butt. So that's why the Secret Service called Dick Cheney Edgar, because Dick Cheney was running everything. In that same debate in South Carolina, Donald Trump accuses George Bush, and he says they didn't listen to their CIA and they let 9/11 happen. I mean, people think that George Bush is the only one that got the CIA memo titled Bin Laden determined to attack in the United States a month before 9/11. George Bush is not the only one who got that CIA briefing. Liz Cheney's father also got that CIA briefing. Bush's entire cabinet got that CIA briefing, Bin Laden determined to attack within the United States a month before 9/11. It warns of them trying to hijack planes, surveilling buildings in New York. It's all in that document. So Donald Trump called out George Bush, and by calling out George Bush, he's also calling out Liz Cheney's father, because Liz Cheney's father worked closely with this guy, George Bush's father, going back to the Ford administration. When George Bush was made director of Central Intelligence in the Ford administration on the night of the Halloween massacre, Liz Cheney's father was made Gerald Ford's chief of staff. And they've worked together going back to the Ford administration. Gerald Ford, who served on the Warren Commission again. So they're telling us that the Russians are back at it with an influence campaign. Again, it's influence. Liz Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris now, coming out and endorsing Kamala Harris. None of that's surprising. But what's surprising is what the things that she said about Kamala Harris in the past, and now she's endorsing Kamala Harris. This woman has no shame.
As somebody who is a centrist, and I think that the president has a lot of in one fell swoop here, he has put somebody on the ticket whose voting record in the Senate is to the left of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
True.
So I think that, the American people are going to look at the substance of this. They're going to look at what she stood for in the past. They're going to look at what she said during the primary election. And it's very clear. She is a radical liberal. She's somebody that has said we ought to spend $32 trillion on Medicare for all. If you look at her record as well in California, she did, in fact, essentially ban gun sales with executive action. And she threatened during the primaries to do the same case as somebody.
All true, Liz. All true. So, I mean, how can you call yourself a conservative and support someone like that and endorse someone like that and endorse someone who's going to do this to our country? How, Liz? How? Because Liz takes orders. Liz is part of the establishment, part of the Bush-Clinton dynasty. And it's just shameful. So the Russians are back with an influence campaign. Again, they're running the same 2016 playbook with the Russians again. And let's get into talking about this. Take a listen to this clip.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And we are following breaking news just into CNN. The Biden administration is expected to accuse Russia of a sustained effort to influence the 2024 election. CNN's Evan Perez has more on this exclusive reporting. It's just coming into CNN. Evan, what can you tell us?
Well, Jim, this is an effort by the Biden administration to get ahead of what...
Get ahead of it, huh?
...are allegedly doing ahead of this 2024 election. And so, sources have told Sean Lingus and Kylie Atwood, Zach Cohen, and me that this is really the most significant effort by the Biden administration.
Oh, the most significant.
This out. We've seen Russia Today, which is now called RT. We've seen some of their activity that the Justice Department has called out. For instance, they said that there was a Russia Today employee who was running about 1,000 social media accounts that were essentially used to sort of divide Americans, propelled some of the division that we already see on social media. And so what we expect today from the Biden administration, State Department, Treasury, Justice Department, we expect that they're going to call out the Russians for what is a persistent effort that they believe is directed at influencing the 2024 election and voters.
So that's the issue. Influence. We've talked about this before. If you've watched my podcast, last time we talked about the Russians, I did a series of podcasts throughout February and March, breaking down the war in Ukraine. But we talked about this influence campaign. That's what they're calling it. Influence. That's what he says here, that the Russians are trying to influence people in the election. And he says also that they're trying to divide Americans. Who's trying to divide Americans more than CNN? Have you watched your programming, bro? Have you? Maybe you guys should go and look at what's going on MSNBC and take a look at how they're trying to divide Americans over there. But these are the two accusations that they're making against the Russians, is that they're trying to influence Americans and they're trying to divide Americans. Influence, though. Let's focus on that. Because who's not trying to influence you in this election? Is it illegal now to influence people? Liz Cheney. What is Liz Cheney doing with her endorsement of Kamala Harris? Why would anybody care about Liz Cheney's endorsement? She's trying to influence people. They're trying to influence people on MSNBC every day. If you watch their programming, they're trying to influence people on CNN and divide people on CNN. This is what's going on CNN. But for some reason, it's wrong for the Russians to try to influence people. It's weird. Let's listen to a little bit of Merrick Garland here talk about the indictment.
2 months before Election Day, the Department of Justice accused Russia of an elaborate, sophisticated propaganda campaign to sway voters. 2 Russian officials with state-controlled RT are charged as part of an alleged scheme to work with a Tennessee company to publish stories favorable to Russia, to splinter Americans and dampen support for Ukraine.
So to splinter Americans and damper support for Ukraine, and it goes back to RT, take note of that this is all about the Russia Today RT network, and they've been an English-speaking outlet here in the United States for over a decade now. But again, this you're going to see started these accusations towards RT started in 2016, and now they're running the playbook back again. But notice, this is an effort to influence and sway voters. Influence and sway. Same thing everybody's doing. Who's not trying to influence and sway Americans in this election? That's what the campaigning is about. Donald Trump's trying to influence and sway voters. Kamala Harris is trying to influence and sway voters. China is trying. You don't think China is trying to influence and sway voters, or they're not trying to influence here in the United States? You don't think China has control? You guys ever heard the story about the sequel to Top Gun when they wrote the sequel to I think it was the sequel of Top Gun that they wanted to use China as, or no, it was the sequel to Red Dawn. I think it was the sequel to Red Dawn they did, and they wanted to use China as the invading country. And the influence of China in Hollywood was so great that the Chinese government forced them to take that out of the script. Is that not influence? You don't think China has influence on the programming that goes on at ABC Disney and the programming that is that not influence? Are the Chinese not influencing? Is Israel through their money and through their PACs and agencies are not trying to influence? Who's not trying to influence right now? Everyone's trying to influence. Tell me if you can even point to Russia doing this, why this is wrong and why this is a crime. And that's what you got to understand, people, that this is nothing more than an indictment. What Merrick Garland is doing here with this indictment is nothing more than an allegation. You don't know if this is real or not. This is he's a prosecutor. This guy's a prosecutor. This is the prosecution's case and the prosecution's allegations. I mean, if everything that a prosecutor put in an indictment and an allegation was true, there would be no need to go to trial. There would be no need to cross-examine the information that he puts in an indictment if he just puts it. But that's all he's done. They've put out this indictment and put out this information, and it's to make you question it. The people who are dumb and they're falling for this again. Oh, the Russians again. When I see this information, what information? What's the information that Russia is using to influence the election and divide the country? What exactly are the talking points that the Russians are using? Let's talk about that.
RT are charged as part of an alleged scheme to work with a Tennessee company to publish stories favorable to Russia, to splinter Americans and dampen support for Ukraine. Both officials remain at large overseas.
The American people were informed.
Both officials, so the people in this indictment, just like with Mueller, indicting all those Russians who were never going to be extradited, never going to serve trial. They were never going to go to court and cross-examine this information. So again, the prosecutor, Merrick Garland, can put whatever he wants in this indictment because he's indicting people overseas that are never, ever going to come to trial. And this information is never, ever going to be cross-examined. So it's only a prosecutor's case that is in this indictment. It's only his word that is unchallenged in this indictment. You would be an idiot to believe this, people.
Overseas.
The American people were informed when a foreign power engages in political activities or seeks to influence public discourse.
The feds also seized 32 internet domains believed to be tools of Russia's disinformation campaign, directed by Vladimir Putin's administration, with a playbook to push polarizing issues.
All right, what are these issues? Inflation. That's the first one. That's the first bullet point. That's the first talking point that they're saying that this. If you see people on your feed and you hear people talking about inflation, that's a Russian talking point. And people talking about inflation, that's a Russian talking point. That's what they're telling you. Inflation in this election, where this is one of the major issue, if not the major issue in the election, that's a Russian talking point. is what they're telling. Do you see what they're doing here? People, how could anyone fall for this? You'd have to be so dumb to fall for this. What are some of these other Russian talking points?
Inflation, job loss for
white Americans. So job loss for white Americans. Those are Russian talking points. If you hear people talking about that or pushing that, that's Russian talking points.
White Americans, privileges for people of color.
If you hear that people of color, now who are people of color? Are people of color these migrants that are coming over that are getting debit cards and that are being put up in hotels and getting all this money? So privileges for people of color, which is one of the top issues in this election. If this isn't inflation's probably the number one issue. Immigration and all the benefits that all these immigrants are getting is probably the number two issue. And they're telling you that anybody talking about this online, anybody talking about this in their podcast or anything, are pushing Russian disinformation or pushing Russian talking points, that you have to be leery of them. You have to be suspicious of them if they're talking about inflation, if they're talking about migrants getting a bunch of privileges after they come over the border, or DEI, or any of that. You have to be leery of them that they may be Russians, is what they're doing here.
Threats of crime from people of color.
Threats of crime from people of color. So if you're talking about the migrants that are committing crimes and they're coming over here, if you're talking about the Venezuelans in Colorado, those are Russian talking points. So you have to be leery. If you see anybody talking about this, you have to be leery of them, that they're pushing Russian talking points. They could be in the pocketbook of Vlad, is the game that they're running here with this Russian hoax 2.0. Again, people, I can't believe anybody would fall for this. This is part of the indictment. These are, again, some of the talking point campaign topics. Encroaching universal poverty. If you're talking about record inflation, if you're talking about halting economic growth, unaffordable prices for food or essentials goods. These are talking points. So if you're talking about unaffordable prices for goods and essential goods, inflation, those are Russian talking points. Risk of job losses for white Americans, just talked about that. Privileges for people of people of color, perverts, disabled, consistent lies of U.S. policy, Party B. So Party B is the Democratic Party. So if you're talking about the consistent lies of the Democratic Party administration, that's Russian talking points that you could be in the pocketbook of Vlad, basically. This comes straight from the indictment. So it's very clear what they're doing here, but Megyn Kelly breaks the indictment down and breaks this all down very well. I want you to listen to a little bit of her, and then I have some more that I want to share with you after this.
Okay. We knew yesterday that the DOJ was going to be making some sort of an announcement about Russian influence in this election. And we talked about that. We talked about how Russia has been a stalking horse for Democrats for some time when it comes to, this is why we lost the 2016 election.
You even fell for it.
Did in order to get ahead.
She even fell for it, as I'm going to show you in a moment. She fell for it back in 2016.
And Russia. And indeed, they do love to wave this flag as an excuse for virtually everything. Well, the DOJ, we knew, was coming out yesterday with a major announcement. And when we closed the show yesterday, we said, we'll cover it for you. And our guest tomorrow will be Dave Rubin. Well, imagine our surprise when later that day, the DOJ announced that its case is not against Dave Rubin. Maybe I need to be perfectly clear about that, nor is he accused of doing anything criminal or wrong. He, in fact, is one of the victims of this scheme that the DOJ alleged in great detail yesterday. He, Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, and other conservative media personalities you likely know well. They've all been swept up in this Department of Justice indictment announced last night, not against them, but against two Russians, a male and a female, for their involvement in creating an independent media company that used the podcast feeds and services of these big names in order to amplify their own channel called Tenet Media. And the whole thing turned out to be covertly funded by Russian media organization RT, so alleges the Department of Justice.
RT.
It's a complicated case that is unsurprisingly not being covered honestly so far by the corporate press, but I'm just going to lay it out for you quickly, relatively quickly. Okay, so here's the deal.
Before she lays it out, I just want to make this clear too, that all of these podcasts and influencers that have been swept up in this scheme, and I love the fact that she calls it a scheme because it's absolutely a scheme. What this does too, it not only puts into your mind, if you're dumb enough to fall for this, when you start seeing people talk about these very important issues in this election, when you hear your friends, see your friends sharing this on Facebook or on Instagram or on Twitter, then you start to be leery of your friends and say, the person who's sharing this information about inflation has been the victim of Russian propaganda or Russian misinformation, which is ridiculous. Anybody who goes to the grocery store is going to be talking about inflation. Come on. But that's going to make you think that about your friend or whoever is sharing this information. But it's also going to make you think that, if you're dumb enough to fall for this, about these podcasts, these independent creators on YouTube and on Rumble and other platforms like this podcast, and make you think that this person, and you'll be suspicious of them and leery of them, that this person is pushing Russian talking points because they're talking about inflation or illegal immigration. So it makes you it makes you leery and suspicious of anyone sharing the information, but it also herds those people back to mainstream media, where they can be fed the mainstream fake news lies by CNN, MSNBC, and these other networks who are trying to influence you, who are trying to divide you. The same accusations that they're making against the Russians is happening on all of the mainstream media platforms, MSNBC, ABC, CBS. They're all feeding you propaganda. They're all trying to influence you. But what this does with this indictment now, to people who are dumb enough to fall for this, it herds them away from independent media and voices like podcasts and creators, and herds those people back into the comfort of mainstream news. So I think that is a huge point that you need to understand in this scheme that the Biden administration is putting out with this Russiagate hoax 2.0.
Alleging that these two Russians who worked for RT, I mean, that does matter, but it's really the fact that they're in Russia and they're Russian and they're pushing Russian interests. What they did was they called their friend Lauren Chen. Now, she is a Canadian citizen who's living and working in America, I believe living here too, but definitely working in America for, among others, The Blaze. And she's a relatively well-known conservative personality online. I will say she's a troll. I unfollowed her a while ago because it was obvious this is not a person worth listening to on X. So they contacted Lauren Chen because, unbeknownst to me, she had worked for RT for a year as a commentator, apparently on the air, but at least writing articles for them. So openly affiliating with this channel. Now, it's not that RT, it's definitely state-run media. It is with Russia. I mean, good luck finding them doing anything critical of Vladimir Putin. Trust me. They try to get more and more influence in the United States. They've had people reach out to me many times to try to get me to do something. It's a no. Okay, they know that by this point. But But in this case, they did reach out to Lauren, according to this indictment, and said, help us form a new independent media company and help us find influencers who will work for it. And according to the indictment, she did. She and her husband both did that and recruited guys like Dave and Tim Pool and Benny and 3 others I never heard of. And she, according to the indictment, knew that the Russians would be funding this and editing content, but the influencers, the conservative podcasters, did not. And that's according to the indictment. That's why none of them has been indicted. The feds are saying Rubin, Poole, Benny, they didn't know. They were not told. In fact, they were given misinformation by Lauren because they allege she knew they would never do this if they understood it was being funded by the Russians. She told them that it was all being funded by some French businessman, Edouard Grigorian.
But why would it be okay? Why would it be okay if it was some French businessman, but not the Russians? I mean, I do not understand this. Why is it okay for China to influence, to have influence, and to be able to have, the influence to edit scripts in Hollywood, and the influence to say what the programming in Disney is? Why does China have that ability, or some French businessman? Why can they influence? Why can Israel influence? But Russia, for some reason, can't influence. I don't understand. I don't understand this indictment at all in that regard. But it's funny because Town Hall put this tweet out today. In the last 24 hours, Kamala Harris received 2 major endorsements. Because after this indictment, the Russian government started trolling the Biden DOJ and laughing at them. They put out this message saying that 2016 would like their cliches back because this is so much like 2016. Now, if you remember the 2016 report that came out right before the election in 2016, because WikiLeaks had dumped all of these emails from the DNC showing how the DNC was rigging the primary against Bernie Sanders. And then they came out with this report, and it was about the Russian involvement, and it says right here, the title, Assessing Russian Activities and Intentions in the Recent U.S. Elections. And this was all about the hacking and not only the hacking, but mostly it's about the influence campaign, the buying ads on Facebook and buying and creating ads and stuff like that, and influencing people. Like, that's such a big deal. But if you notice here, these three logos, Central Intelligence, FBI, and NSA. So these are the 3 agencies that were responsible for this report. Only 3 agencies. But if you remember, they went around all before that election and in the next year, even after Trump became president, and they claimed that this report was the work of all 17 U.S. intelligence agencies. And I explained to you before why they did this, because and the reason that they said that all 17 agencies were responsible for this report, because if people knew that there was only these 3 agencies responsible for the report, namely these 2, the FBI under James Comey and the CIA under John Brennan, that John Brennan here, if people knew that this document and this assessment only came from these 3 agencies, then it would have no credibility, because nobody trusts the CIA. Nobody trusts the FBI. And the other thing, too, about this report is the assessment is given high credibility by the CIA and by the NSA. It's only given by the FBI, it's only given moderate credibility by the NSA. So that's why they lied and told us over and over again that all 17 agencies were responsible for this report in 2016 and 17, is to give it credibility. And here's some examples of that. Bill Maher first.
Okay, so since we're not going to agree on the part that isn't completely now nailed down by law enforcement, let's just go to the part that's incontrovertible, which is that the Russians meddled in the election. All 17 of our intelligence agencies say that. You would agree to that, right? Well, all 17 of our intelligence agencies say that. All 17 of our intelligence agencies say
that. So it wasn't 17 agencies. It was only 3 agencies again. But Bill Maher is repeating a lie that he heard from the Obama administration. Obama administration and Hillary Clinton were the ones who first started telling the lie about the 17 intelligence agencies. Here's Megyn Kelly telling the lie about the 17 intelligence agencies.
And what the experts say is that this couldn't have been faked, that it's not one factor, that it's 100 factors that point to Russia. They say it's the forensics, it's the digital fingerprints, it's the IP addresses, the malware, the encryption keys, the specific pieces of code, that all of them point to Russia, and none of them points to anyone other than Russia.
Какие отпечатки пальцев? What fingerprints, or hooves prints, or horn prints? What are you talking about? IP addresses, they can be invented. You know, there are very many specialists that can invent or fix it up. You know, a kid of yours can send it. Your girl that is 3-year-old can perpetrate such an attack.
This is not my allegation. This is the conclusion of the 17 U.S. intelligence agencies. The 17 U.S. intelligence agencies. The 17 U.S. intelligence agencies.
So 17 U.S. intelligence agencies. Megyn Kelly falls for it too. There's only 3 U.S. intelligence agencies responsible for this report. So you got Bill Maher falling for the 17 U.S. intelligence agencies. Megyn Kelly falling for the 17 U.S. intelligence agencies. And where did they hear this? They heard it from the Obama administration, and from Hillary Clinton is where they heard this lie from about the 17 U.S. intelligence agencies to give this document credibility. Take a listen.
The White House did not decide earlier to blow the whistle on the Russians
before
the election.
We did blow the whistle on the Russians
7th.
on October 7th, and that came as soon as the intelligence community and all of its component parts, 17 agencies. So they all lied and said that this document in 2016, assessing what Russia had done in the 2016 election as coming from all 17 U.S. intelligence agencies, and it actually only came from 3, and only 2 gave it high confidence. James Comey's FBI, who is investigating Trump at this time during the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, and the CIA under John Brennan. It only came from them, not 17 agencies. But they lied to give it credibility. Now, what is in this assessment in 2017 or 2016? It's all this stuff about RT. Look at this. They're pulling RT again, people. And look at this. RT introduces 2 news shows talking about RT's programming, and how RT's programming before the 2016 election was Russian disinformation to change the election. They're criticizing RT's coverage of the Occupy Wall Street movement after the financial crisis in 2008, which we're going to talk about in the next podcast, criticizing RT for that. RT coverage of Occupy Wall Street movement was a information warfare. They categorize it as information warfare in this document. So this is all about RT. This is one of my favorite right here. RT runs anti-fracking programming. Anti-fracking programming. So anti-fracking was part of the talking points that RT was using in this influence campaign in 2016. MSNBC was talking about, had anti-fracking programming. Kamala Harris was against fracking back then, but these are Russian talking points. RT running
anti-fracking. So all of this was about RT. This whole document, it does talk about some of the Facebook stuff. It talks about some of the hacking and stuff like this. But the majority of the accusations that they were making were against RT, Russia Today. And now they're running the same playbook, bringing it back and accusing Russia Today of influencing our elections. Again, who's not influencing our election? This is Anna from the Young Turks. She put this out. I'm glad the DOJ is alert and ready to tackle possible Russian influence in our media and political system. Foreign influence over our government is wrong, clearly. Maybe one day they'll have the bandwidth to tackle AIPAC and Israel's influence over our political system. Again, she makes a point. I mean, no one can deny this, that AIPAC has influence over our political system. They're influencing us. China is trying to influence us. The mainstream media is trying to influence us. There's influence on a daily basis. You're going to be influenced. It's what life's about. I mean, you have to be a smarter and a wiser consumer because everyone is trying to influence you. How is this illegal? It's not illegal. Those Russians that were just indicted in Russia are never going to go to trial. This is the information in Merrick Garland's indictment. It's never going to be cross-examined. It's never going to be challenged. This is just to get information out there that the Russians are meddling in the election before the election to make people leery and suspicious over all the information that they see about major issues like about major issues like inflation and immigration, and they're telling you that all of that is Russian talking points. It's ridiculous. But there are some real influence campaigns going on in the United States that I think that if the Justice Department is worried about influence campaigns, then they should be worried about stuff like this. This video went viral over the past couple of days of this girl asking Alexa questions about the election. How's this not election interference? How's Alexa and Amazon not trying to influence voters with this? Take a listen.
Alexa, why should I vote for Donald Trump?
I cannot provide content that promotes a specific political party or a specific candidate.
Alexa, why should I vote for Kamala Harris?
While there are many reasons to vote for Kamala Harris, the most significant may be that she is a strong candidate with a proven track record of accomplishment. As the first female vice president, Harris has already broken down a major gender barrier.
Wow.
And her career in politics has been characterized by a commitment to progressive ideals and a focus on helping disenfranchised communities.
Wow. So Alexa wouldn't answer a question, why should I vote for Donald Trump? Because Alexa doesn't want to get political. And then when she asks Alexa why should I vote for Kamala Harris, Alexa starts laying out all of these talking points about why you should vote for Kamala Harris. How is this not influence? Why is the Justice Department not working on indictments, to curb this election interference and influence campaign to influence Amazon customers who have Alexa? I mean, this is ridiculous, people. Google, same thing. People started calling Google out for election interference and influence campaigns that Google is doing that's completely dishonest. People are doing searches for Donald Trump and getting stuff about Kamala Harris coming back after they search for Donald Trump. This is Google's finger on the scale, trying to influence people in the election. Why isn't the Justice, if the Justice Department is worried about influence and people having their thumb on the scale in the election, why aren't they looking into this? This is ridiculous, people. It's absolutely ridiculous, and you would have to be crazy to fall for it. Now, have a little bit more time, I want to get back into some stuff about Nancy Pelosi that I didn't get to in the last podcast. And I want to talk a little bit about January 6th here, because we were explaining how the Pelosi's and the Duchy of California, that these families work together. This is, again, George H.W. Bush talking to Pelosi's husband, Pelosi, with the hand on George H.W. Bush's shoulder. These guys are all friends. They work together to loot the country and to get rich. We were talking about this in the last podcast. I want to start here in this segue into getting back into Nancy Pelosi and talking about January 6th. I want to play this clip of Liz Cheney, and this was the event that Liz Cheney was at yesterday when she announced that she's going to be voting for Kamala Harris. I want you to listen to what this woman says.
I think people have to commit themselves not to forget is what Donald Trump did during the 187 minutes. So Donald Trump had mobilized this mob. He knew they were armed. He fed them with lies about the election. He sent them to the Capitol armed. And then he gets back to the White House. And he gets back to the White House within 15 minutes of walking off stage at the Ellipse. He's told by a White House employee, there's a riot at the Capitol. So he knows when he walks back into the Oval Office, there's violence at the Capitol. Then he goes into his dining room and he turns on the television and he watches the violence at the Capitol. Go watch the video of what was happening on the west front of the Capitol, the police officers being beaten viciously by people carrying Trump flags, with Trump flags. He watched people assault our Capitol in his name. He sat there as members of his family, as members of his staff, pleaded with him, tell the mob to stop. They pleaded with him, and he wouldn't do it.
She's a liar. This woman is an absolute liar. And again, that's why Nancy Pelosi put her on the January 6th committee, because Kevin McCarthy wouldn't put her on the committee. So the Democrat, a Speaker of the House, put her on the committee as a co-chair of the committee. That's why she was censored by her party, is because she's part of the Bush-Clinton dynasty. She is part of the establishment, of the cabal, of the empire. So they're all friends. So that's why Nancy Pelosi put her on the commission. But what she says here is an absolute lie. Now, first of all, the breach at the Capitol happened, the very first breach at the Capitol, and the violence happened while Donald Trump was speaking to his mob of supporters. The supporters that came there to support him were down at the Ellipse listening to him speak. And when he was speaking there, he was telling his supporters that when you go down to the Capitol, I want you to be peaceful. I want you to be patriotic. I don't want you to be violent when you go down to the Capitol. But this first breach of the Capitol is happening while Donald Trump is speaking. Take a listen.
Ray Epps, who we just saw calling for demonstrators to enter the Capitol, can be seen approaching the front of the barricades and speaking to Ryan Samsel. Moments later, the barricade is pushed directly into the police line.
This is the first breach.
After the gate is forcefully pushed forward, U.S. Capitol Police Officer Caroline Edwards is knocked to the ground. Ryan Samsel immediately runs to her aid to help her get back on her feet.
And again,
violent skirmish.
Look at the time here, 12:55. This is 12:55 when the first breach is taking place. This is a great documentary. If you guys wanted a complete timeline of what happened on January 6th, this documentary is called January 6th, A True Timeline. And all it does is it gives you the details along with the time. So 12:55 is when this first breach, where Ray Epps is whispering in the guy's ear who pushes these little bitty inky dinky fences. And I've asked this question every time I've talked about this. Why did they not have the gate with the razor wire that they put up after the riot Why did they not have that gate up before the riot? If they would have had that gate up, you never would have had this breach. You never would have had the trespassing. Why did they not put that gate up? It's one of many questions. But this is the very first breach. And as you notice, at 12:55, when this breach is going on, Donald Trump is still speaking. This woman is an absolute liar. She's an evil person. And of course, she is endorsing Kamala Harris. Tells you a lot about Kamala Harris that she's getting the endorsement of people like this. All right.
Who he just and speaking to Ryan Samsel. Moments later, the barricade is pushed directly into the police line. After the gate is forcefully pushed forward, U.S. Capitol Police Officer Caroline Edwards is knocked to the ground. Ryan Samsel immediately runs to her aid to help her get back on her feet. The first violent skirmish of the day between demonstrators and police had begun.
This is the first skirmish.
President Trump remains speaking on the ellipse.
In Clark County, Nevada. Donald Trump is still speaking. when Ray Epps and this first mob is breaking through, Donald Trump is still speaking to thousands of his supporters that are down listening to him say, be peaceful, be patriotic. Look at the time, 12:55. What does Liz Cheney say here? That when Donald Trump came off of the stage, that he was told that there was a riot going on at the Capitol, which had already started while he was speaking, that he went back to the White House and he didn't do nothing, is what she says. That's a lie. That's a lie. This is a tweet that Donald Trump put out just before he went on stage. Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on our side. On the side of our country, stay peaceful. Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on our side. Stay peaceful. So this is the tweet that Donald, and this is how Donald Trump communicates with his supporters. He had been communicating throughout his entire administration through his Twitter account. So Donald Trump puts this out before he gets on stage. Be peaceful. Respect our Capitol Police and our law enforcement. Then he goes on stage. The breach happens while he's on stage, while he's speaking. While he's speaking, he tells the crowd, when you go down to the Capitol, be peaceful, be patriotic. He tells them that again. And then when he gets off stage, this is at 12:13. So 12:13, he puts this one out. And I guess this is another tweet that he put out before he got on stage and started speaking. I'm asking everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. No violence. Remember, we are a party of law and order. Respect our law. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you. So this is the second tweet that he had put out just before he got on stage. So now this new video has come out of Nancy Pelosi, and this is video that is taken by her daughter. Her daughter is there filming a documentary and documenting all of this stuff with her film crew. And now that the Republicans control the House of Representatives, they're looking into some of these security failures and what happened before January 6th and why the National Guard wasn't there, why the fence that I just talked about wasn't put up. And I want you to listen to this clip about this new video with Nancy Pelosi coming out.
New video has emerged from the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, showing then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi hours after rioters stormed the building. The footage was turned over to Congress by HBO and obtained by CBS. And her comments are featured in a documentary by her daughter, Alexandra Pelosi. In it, the then House Speaker can be heard lashing out at then President Donald Trump. Pelosi also criticized the decision not to have the National Guard on site that day.
So she criticizes the decision not to have the National Guard that day. See, that's the thing about Liz Cheney talking about what Trump did after the breach had already happened, after the riot had already happened. But what about before the riot, Liz Cheney? Why wasn't the National Guard already there? Why wasn't the fence put up, Liz Cheney? And so you have Nancy Pelosi here criticizing Donald Trump and criticizing the fact, this is the second video that's come out of her criticizing the fact that the National Guard wasn't there before the riot.
How many times did the members ask, are we prepared?
So again, this is all show. Everything that she's saying here. She's saying, how many times have members asked? She's talking about members of the House of Representatives, where she's the Speaker of the House. How many times have members been asked, are we prepared? So she's asking before January 6th, are we prepared? Do we have everything we need? Are we prepared? We're not prepared. She knows her daughter is filming this. Her daughter is the documentarian. She knows that her daughter is there documenting all this. So everything that she's saying is for show here. She knows why the National Guard wasn't there. She knows whose decision that was. This is the Speaker of the House. But this is all for show.
Are we prepared? We're not. Prepared for the worst.
They're calling the National Guard now. They should have been here from the start. Here to start with. National Guard should have been there to start with. The fence should have been put up to start with. Why was it not, Nancy Pelosi?
National Guard? Now? Should have been here to start out.
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott
should have been there to start out with, is what she says about the National Guard. The National Guard should have been here to start out with. Why was the National Guard not there to start out with? Well, Adam Kinzinger was the other Republican who Nancy Pelosi put on the January 6th committee. He was also censored by his colleagues, his Republican colleagues in the House of Representatives. He also lost his congressional seat. He is also a part of the empire. He is also friends with George W. Bush and part of this whole Bush Clinton gang. So that's why Adam Kinzinger and that's why Nancy Pelosi Liz Cheney were put on the January 6th committee. But I want you to listen to what this liar says here about why the National Guard was not at the Capitol. The question that performatively, because she knows her daughter is recording this, the question that Nancy Pelosi performatively asked here while she knows that her daughter is recording this, why wasn't the Guard there to begin with? Let's listen to Adam Kinzinger answer that question. Lie about it.
I would like to get your take on why this was released, because Republicans are looking in the House, looking for ways to dispute what happened on January 6th. What do you make of them trying to use some of this video as a way to try and say what happened didn't happen or there was something nefarious on the Democrat side?
Listen to how she asked this question. Like, again, CNN's not trying to influence you. Listen to the way she asked that question. I mean, the fact that Republicans now that didn't take part in the January 6th committee because Nancy Pelosi wouldn't allow them to put the members on the committee that they wanted. None of the information from the January 6th committee was cross-examined or there was any pushback on it. And now they're looking into it. And this CNN reporter is like, well, why are they putting this out now? Why are they trying to act like, what happened didn't happen? Well, how do you know what happened? What are you talking about? That's a real biased way to ask that question.
Use some of this video as a way to try and say what happened didn't happen or there was something nefarious on the Democrat side.
I mean, this is exactly what they do. So they try to obfuscate and say that, look, it was Nancy Pelosi's fault that the Capitol wasn't ready. Now let's keep in mind and here's the problem, and this is what they take advantage of, okay, is that there is talking about how things work, it's sometimes complicated.
It's not complicated.
You can just react with a quick thing. So the complicated thing is
it's not complicated.
Capitol Police Board.
There's a Capitol Police Board. There's a Capitol Police Board. It's a 4-member board. You're absolutely right, Ken Zinger. It's not complicated at all. It's a 4-member board. It's the Capitol architect. It's the Capitol Chief of Capitol Police and the House Sergeant at Arms and the Senate Sergeant at Arms. That's the Capitol Police Board, and they're the ones who make the decision. And I've already shown you how the House Sergeant at Arms, who speaks directly for the Speaker of the House, the House Sergeant at Arms answers directly to the Speaker of the House. He was the one that said that they didn't have the intelligence, to call the National Guard. And this guy, again, is trying to blame Trump for the National Guard, just like Nancy Pelosi tries to blame Trump for the National Guard not being there. No, it was the Capitol Police Board and the House Sergeant at Arms who basically said that they didn't have the intelligence.
It's complicated, and you can just react with a quick thing. So the complicated thing is there is a Capitol Police Board that governs the Capitol Police. Nancy Pelosi has no control over the National Guard.
She has control over the House Sergeant at Arms, buddy. And the House Sergeant at Arms is the one who says that they did not have the intelligence. Real quick, I want to play this clip of AOC. I've played it before, but she says that she knew a week before January 6th that there was going to be violence and that they should have been prepared, and that she was getting text messages from other members of Congress.
1 week before, the week prior to the insurrection, I started to get text messages that I needed to be careful. And that in particular, I needed to be careful about the 6th.
Let me fast forward this.
About Thursday. And those text messages came from other members of Congress.
Text messages telling her to be careful. There's going to be violence, and they're coming from other members of Congress. And then I played the clip of the general of the D.C. National Guard, who was friends with the chief of Capitol Police, then Capitol Police, and Chief's son tells him that he's not allowed to request the National Guard.
I talked to Chief's son on Sunday. I talked to him Saturday and Sunday. We talk. We're friends. Mm-hmm. I've known him for a long time. So on Sunday, I asked him, are you going to request D.C. National Guard help? And if you do, I need it in writing. It has to be formal because the Secretary of Defense has to approve it. He told me he was not allowed to request a support.
So he's not allowed to request a support. That's the chief of Capitol Police, who's on the Capitol Police Board. Adam Kinzinger is saying that he is not allowed to request the National Guard. Why is he not allowed? And that's because the Sergeant at Arms, House Sergeant at Arms, who's also on the board, would not allow him because of Nancy Pelosi. So you're lying. You're lying and you're covering up. So, folks, I have more that I wanted to share. I have one more clip that I want to share, but I don't have time. We're going to get into the financial crisis on Monday. The 2008 financial crisis. I'm going to start breaking that down for you. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.